Hi everyone, and welcome to this next session of FEM. Today I'm joined by Anna Pollins, who's kindly agreed to talk to us today. And today's session is called The Power of Questions, Developing Your Questioning Skills to Drive Results. And I'll just give a quick introduction to Anna before I pass over to her. Anna Pollins has 20 years financial services experience in relationship management, development and distribution roles. And she's currently head of practice development at Raymond James, helping wealth management businesses develop, grow and plan for succession. So thank you, Anna, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Gretchen, and delighted to be here and talk to you about this topic. It's something that I learned about a bit earlier on in my career, and it's still definitely a work in progress. But I'm looking forward to sharing a few thoughts and ideas with everybody that hopefully they can take home.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's going to be a really important topic, and we were just talking off camera about how it's important for financial planners, but also sort of at all levels of business. And I think that hopefully this can be applied to multiple different roles in practices.
Definitely, I think whether you're a planner, looking to become a planner, or even just starting out in your career, doing networking, interviewing somebody, these skills, obviously, with a bit of tailoring, can really apply in all those situations.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so do you want to get started and then just bring me in when you feel like you want some backwards and forwards or conversation in it?
Fantastic, excellent. Okay, so hopefully you should now see a few slides I've put together. I've tried to make them a little bit colourful, just to sort of jazz them up. But so delighted to be here today. And I suppose firstly, we talk a bit about questions, and I suppose partly it's about asking the right question, and also it's just asking it the right way. So part of this is about what I'd really like is at the end of this for people to have a bit of a toolkit, a few things to take away that they can apply into client meetings, but also think about the way in which these questions are posed, and maybe when in the meeting as well. I'm going to focus more on client meetings, as this is really focused on female planners. But as I said already, and Gretchen said, this is a skill that can be applied in a host of different settings. And sometimes I call this a sales skill, and some people cringe at the S word, because this isn't about selling product. You're selling your message. You're influencing somebody to make a decision, to do or actually not do something in many cases. So it could be you're meeting a prospective client for the first time, they're selecting you as their planner. You could be talking to an existing client who's got this great idea about taking all their money out their pension to do something mad with it, and you're trying to persuade them that's not the right thing to do. So you can apply, questioning skills, and that's you selling something. You're selling yourself, if nothing else, and the thing that you can offer them. So hopefully this can apply. So I would encourage anybody, if you haven't got it in front of you already, take notepad and pen, or equivalent, just use a laptop to type some notes, because I do want to kind of have a couple of exercises for people as we go through this as well. So really, objectives for the day. I suppose for me, it's about knowing the different types of questions and how and when to use them, and the benefits of the different approaches. I want to also pick up on some bad habits, and some of those you'll probably recognise. I'll talk about some of my common ones that come up quite a lot. I think how to use questioning skills to control a meeting, how to control the outcome of that meeting as well, and ultimately have better client engagement, better relationships as a result. So I'll have some hints and tips about how to put that into practice, and a few suggested next steps for you as well. So I put this quote on here: it's better to know some of the questions than all of the answers. And I think depending on where you are in your career, and how confident you might feel, and confidence can sort of ebb and flow a little bit. Sometimes we talk about imposter syndrome. Sometimes things that go through your mind, and I've certainly experienced this, is, well, I can't join that meeting or host that meeting, or I don't know if I'm the right person to meet with them because I don't know enough. I'm not an expert. I don't want to go to that networking event because I'm not quite sure what I'm going to to talk to people about. And we focus so much on what information we're trying to broadcast to other people. And actually, if we spent more time thinking about, well, maybe what are some killer questions we could ask? It doesn't matter about how much you know. It's about the smart and insightful questions that you could ask somebody else to draw out what that person knows. So I think that's really important to remind ourselves when we think about our knowledge. We worry so much on being found out. Oh God, I'm not an expert, or I'm a bit rusty in this topic. It doesn't matter. If you've got a few questions, that can really get the conversation flowing, and then the rest should naturally follow from there. And I mentioned I'm going to talk in a bit more detail later on about what makes a good meeting, and some how to maybe use the questioning skills in a meeting environment, when to use certain types of questions. But in thinking about what makes a good meeting, think about what happens when a meeting fails, and really no clear plan or outcome, but also no human connection. And that's really where questions can come in. So questions are a really good way of engaging, building rapport, and building personal connection with people. And the more questions there are, the more interaction there is to and from, the stronger that connection. And regardless of the outcome of that meeting, whether there's and I'll say inverted commas, the sale or not, whether it's just an agreement to have another meeting, agreement to take an action, the more connection you've got, the more likely that is to happen. So the next slide is going to show my age, and Gretchen, you probably also recognise the individual on the left-hand side on here. There's an old colleague and I used to talk about this. For anyone else doesn't know Michael Parkinson, who we sadly lost, I think it was earlier on this year. He was a famous, a TV host and interviewer, and he used to interview many famous individuals on television. And I wish I could come up with someone who did it quite the way that Parky did it. There's lots of other people who do TV interviews. The reason I put this up, and it's just a way to sort of help remind ourselves, is when we think about who did most of the talking on Parkinson's show, it was the guest. It was whoever was sat on the right-hand side there. But who was controlling the conversation? Who was completely in control of that TV show from beginning to end? It was Michael Parkinson, who was asking the questions. So when you've got the right questions, and you can control the meeting, and we're going to come back later on to a scenario that I think we've all been in some form or another, whether we were hosting the meeting or whether we were just observing a meeting, where a conversation's gone completely off-piste, lost control, and or you just come out of, we can all count meetings probably from even last week. We think, right, that was a meeting, I don't really know what that was about, or what the purpose of that was, or why we were there, and certainly I'm not sure, other than maybe agreeing to another meeting and probably more of the same. I don't really know what the point of that was. So with the right questions, hopefully we can help address that. So I've touched on this a bit already, but why are questions so important? Well, as I've said, it can help you control the situation. It's a great way of fact finding, and that sounds stupid. Of course, you need to ask questions, but asking the right questions in the right way. Whether this is in a client meeting or anything else, if you've been on the receiving end and someone has asked you a question, really insightful questions about yourself, and really cared about the answer, and when they've maybe done a bit of research first, or it's a follow-on to another conversation, it really adds credibility. I think, if you go to a conference and someone puts their hands up and asks a really fantastic question, they're far more memorable than the people that put their hand up and just sort of spout how much knowledge they have about a particular topic. So great questions can give you much more credibility. It can help you uncover objections and opportunities as well. So a client might come in and maybe be resistant to something, to moving forward, to sharing some information. There might be a previous experience that they're not, looks like they've told you one reason, but actually it's something else. So asking good questions and learning when and how to probe in the right way, it's a fine balance, can really help. It's obviously a great way to build trust and rapport. And sometimes it's just about building that connection. There might not be an opportunity with that client or a prospective client at that particular point in time, but you've gone away with a really good connection that you can then go back to and re-engage with them at a later stage. Gaining commitment, and that could be commitment in terms of agreement to proceed and to engage. It could be commitment to refer a contact in sort of outside of a client meeting scenario. It could be don't know if someone who's listening in works on the product side and is actually speaking to an IFA and talking to them about a particular investment solution, commitment to maybe explore that further, whatever it might be. I suppose the point that there's an action and something agreed at the end of the meeting. Using clients' own language, COWs, is a great thing as well. So when you're thinking about, if you're asking really good questions and you're listening, when you go back to preparing a recommendation for that client, being able to use the words that they use with you. If they have a particular term that they use for retirement, some people sort of have a term for that, or they talk about their family as the clan or something like that. Being able to use those specific buzzwords back is a really, really strong way of gaining connection as well, and really shows that you've listened and really helps set you apart as well from anyone else. That because I think sometimes it's quite hard, especially if you're meeting prospective client, they've never engaged with somebody before in this way, or they're, I don't know, doing a beauty parade and there's 2 or 3 different people. You're unique, you're your service, but being able to show that connection, can't really compete with that. Making sure that you're actually selling the right service. So someone might come in saying, I'm looking to achieve X, Y, and Z. And actually you in having that conversation, that's really not what they need. They might actually need to go away and speak to their partner or go and do something else first. So when you can understand more about them, you can actually help solve the right problem for them. They come in saying, I want to consolidate my pensions. Actually, what they need to do is, sort their will out first and have a different conversation entirely. And as I say, that personal connection. So really it's about unearthing that kind of pain and desire, motivations, that someone might take action. So I'm not going to go through all of these in lots of detail. I think that some of them, there's obviously some overlap. And I think hopefully you'll have come across some of these before. We talk about open and closed questions, and there's a space for both of them as well. Closed questions, do you want a cup of tea? Yes, no. Versus open, things like, tell me about yourself. What's your experience of financial advice? If you ask closed questions as an example too early on, and it depends how clients generally, if you're meeting someone and they're hopefully they're quite open in a meeting, so it's not to say it doesn't work at all, but if you ask too many closed questions early on, you're probably not going to get that much information out of somebody, and you're going to have to just keep going back and forth, a bit like the yes no game, rather than kind of asking some open questions where you then leave it for somebody else to just really open up and share that information. Question funnel, in terms of, you might start broad and then go down, and we'll touch on that a bit later on. What would be a good outcome from our meeting today? What are those things the most important? What else would you like to discuss? And then you can narrow it down into there. Things, and let's be honest, we've all been on the receiving end of somebody trying to sell to us, leading questions, and you see it in lots of marketing. Wouldn't you like it if? Don't you think it would be useful if? And that can come across as way too pushy. And there's occasional scenarios where it can work, but again, for somebody when you're building that connection, that's not really appropriate, certainly not early on in the meeting. It could be more of a rhetorical question. Would it be great if you had if we could find a solution that could organize everything in one place? Or but again, you don't want to sound like you're sort of selling a product here. Probing questions, so client might answer and you want to get further, so you might say, okay, well, what do you mean by X? Or you mentioned this earlier on, could you tell me more? And you want to be able to kind of go further down and ask more and more questions as you need to. So lots of different tools in the toolkit, but what I'm going to do is just sort of talk through a few different scenarios and give you some examples as well. So one of the things that I often talk about when I'm doing a bit of training with people is and so previous colleagues and I always joke about this, is the asking the right question. And the reason I haven't gone completely mad, put a tomato on there, is Gretchen might give me a call and say, Anna, quick question, is a tomato a fruit? And I'll say, yes, it is. Great, thank you very much. And then you call me today, Gretchen, and say, well, no, I've got a bone to pick with you, because I was making a fruit salad yesterday. I was having people over for lunch, and it was the most disgusting fruit salad I've ever made, because you told me a tomato is a fruit, but it's not sweet, it's disgusting. Why the hell did you tell me that? So the point here is, it's important to ask the right question if you're the questioner, but also if you're being asked a question, make sure that you understand why that question's being asked. So if you called me and said, Anna, is tomato a fruit? I might have said, well, could you tell me why you're asking, or could you give me a bit more information before I answer you? The same, think about when you've got these questioning skills and these tools, think about how you're going to apply them. If you're asking somebody a question, they might give you the answer, but they're not really sort of uncover exactly what you need to do. So I'll talk about some bad habits, because that's quite helpful. And I actually want you to, if you've got a notepad in front of you, maybe just scribble down some of these, or things that you might have experienced or be on the receiving end of, or do yourself. So closed questions. So asking too many closed questions, and you just don't get the right information from people. Would you like this? Yes or no. Can I help you with that? Yes or no. Would you like to proceed? Yes or no. And it just doesn't elicit enough engagement, and it's especially too narrow, especially early on in the meeting. Leading questions, so we talked about already. I don't know, you go into it just reminds me of kind of going in something like PC World and someone trying to sell me a laptop going, wouldn't it be great if you could upgrade for £100 and also get this, so as I say, there are scenarios where you can apply it, but it can sound quite pushy. The third one here is probably what I'm most guilty of, and I think a lot of people are, and we do it with friends. If maybe you haven't seen a friend for a while, and you start sort of saying, how are you doing? I haven't seen you for ages. What have you been up to? Blah, blah, blah. And you're like, hold on a second, what question? It's fine to ask those questions, and it's great. And it doesn't mean someone won't answer all of them. And Gretchen, you're smiling, because I don't know if that's something that you've experienced as well. But sometimes it means that you don't really get all the answers to all the questions that you've just thrown at somebody, especially early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am guilty of it. I'm guilty of it still with clients. I try to do it less. I don't do that sort of, it's in a different scenario there, isn't it? It's not like you would with your friends, because with your friends, it's probably because you're overexcited to see them. It's been so long and you're trying to do that. But with clients, I think I'm usually asking the same question, but I have a habit of putting it two different ways, or sort of saying the first question and then thinking, or are you thinking this? So it's kind of like, yeah, and I do catch myself doing it. So easy to do. It's a really easy one.
Yeah, I would say it's a bad habit, and I still have it. I think you become more and more aware of it. A lot of people do it, and I'd say one sometimes it's just a bit of excitement. You want to know all this information, and so you sort of just think, great, let's ask all these questions. Sometimes I think I've seen people do it where they might worry or hypothesize that someone is wondering why they're asking that question, so they feel that they need to explain themselves. So sometimes they'll ask the question or then answer it themselves and say, tell me about yourself, because I really would like to know a bit more about what's this and what's that. And it's sort of, you had a really great question to start with, like, just tell me about yourself. But then you've kind of gone into loads more information. So sometimes it's a bit of a confidence thing to kind of go, I've got a really good question and I just need to ask it and then shut up. But it's really hard, and I find it really hard to shut up. Sometimes a way to address that, if you want to do it, is to position it, say, I'd love to ask you a few questions about yourself, X, Y, and Z. Tell about yourself, what you've been up to, a bit about your family situation. So let me start with this one. So you can sort of almost ask them all, but then kind of bring it back so that you've set their expectations about it. Or even if you find yourself doing it and you say, but perhaps we could start with my first question. You can even make a joke of it, which was X. Just to allow people to sort of refresh them about an order of questions that you might have. It's connected really to not giving time to respond. So again, someone might need a moment to answer something, especially if you're talking to clients about quite personal situation, or sometimes just people take a little bit longer I talk too quickly, and I'm ready to answer the question before it's been asked of me, which is a terrible habit. But sometimes people like to take their time, so it's getting comfortable. You knew what question you were going to ask before you asked it. They might not know. That's the first time they've ever thought about it. And actually, sometimes when you're talking to clients with about planning, and that's the first time they've really thought about where, I don't know, especially if they need to be thinking about inheritance tax and passing on wealth, generational planning, they might not have given that much thought to different scenarios until you've sat in the room with them. So having that patience and sort of giving them time to answer the questions is great. I've been in meetings with what I'd call robotic questions. I had a horror story, actually. An advisor I used to work with, he had a trainee who I think decided maybe financial advice wasn't for her in the end, but she was sat in a meeting asking questions, saying, tell me X, tell me Y. So going through the fact find, and one of the things was any health issues, and this client sadly talked about his ill health and talked about the fact he had terminal cancer, and then 3 questions down, the person then says, great, and so when you're thinking about time horizon, he'd been told he basically had a year to live, and that's what he'd said. And she's like, so time horizon for investing 0 to 3. It was like that was just a very sort of that's a complete car crash of an example, but the point is, just take the time to actually listen, because we're so worried about asking the killer question. We want to make sure we've actually listened to the answers as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, Anna, I think around those sensitive things that you might get in response to some of the questions that you're asking, I think you have to sort of be brave about some of those additional questions that you might have to ask. So going through a fact find in that way, and those robotic questions, definitely not the way to go. But equally, I have seen people who have asked the right question and we're talking about health, but then because they've been thrown by the fact that that person has disclosed some very highly personal information about health, and they haven't either known what that means, don't know what the condition is, or don't know quite what to say. Instead of just saying, I don't know much about that, could you tell me more, so that I can fully understand, I think you have to be quite brave to ask that question, or at least be sort of not thrown enough. So maybe it's with experience, but I think that's quite, I can see why the person you're talking about did what she did in a very
completely
young trainee kind of environment. But I think it's kind of asking those questions when you're knowing that you can still do it when you've been a bit blindsided, or maybe when you're thrown off, is kind of really important.
And another one, you're right. And I think sometimes I've got a slide note a bit later, talks a bit about the parking space, but it's about, if someone mentions something like that and you think they don't look like they maybe want to go into it now, and or you're not quite sure how to go into it now, it's sort of saying, I would like to explore that a bit more with you at some point, but maybe we'll come back to that. So you've kind of contracted with them that you might come back and re-engage on that topic, but maybe if it doesn't feel like they're comfortable, or it might not be the right time, you've just made a note of it, you put it in your little parking space on your notepad, and then you can come back either at the end of the meeting or revisit it, rather than necessarily probing too much, depending on, especially if you don't know them that well, and or you're lacking the confidence. Cutting across and answering your own questions, a bit like the kind of multi questions. It's sort of I don't know, tell me about this, because I imagine it's this, that, and the other, and it's like, whoa. I mean, we have that. I've seen that sometimes. Irrelevant questions. So sometimes it's sort of, they've just told you a bit like that. I mean, that's a terrible example I've just given, but in a fact find, or they're just, I don't know, they're single, they don't have any dependents, and then you start asking questions about passing on wealth, and again, there might be it's just making sure that you really listen to the answer. I mean, it's not rocket science, but it's just making sure that you do ask the right questions, and you're not asking the wrong person that question as well. And that kind of going off on a tangent, which it's very easy, and I'll come back to that, because to that point of losing control, that's really interesting, tell me more, and you realize you spent 45 minutes of an hour meeting on a topic that both of you are having a great time, you've had a lovely old chat, but actually you've not helped them in the way that you wanted. And the one I mentioned, they're not quitting after a yes or picking up on selling signals. What I don't mean, when selling signals might not be the right word, but for example, if that was initial meeting and they've said that they want to proceed and actually go into, say, full discovery, or depending on whatever your process looks like, some people express that they say yes, or they say, yes, I'd be interested to find out more. Could we put this again? Great. But it's almost then, why are you kind of going on more and sort of having to you're almost like going back through that process again. So it's listening for the yes and going, great, let's put that in, let's agree that, and then we can come back to the other things later on. So depending on what the purpose of the meeting is and how long you have, what your objective is, just making sure, again, I mean, different scenarios. Let's go back to PC World. I said I want to buy that laptop. Why are you now pushing me on the laptop? I've already said I want to buy it. Just pick it up and take it to the till for me. God, you almost get annoyed sometimes to see people then go over it again. So yeah, think about your own bad habits. But I guarantee a lot of people on here, it's that multi-questioning. And once you're aware of it, as I say, it's quite a hard one to break, but just sort of make a little note on your notepad each time you're in a client meeting where you notice yourself doing it. It's not the end of the world, but it is something to be mindful of. So best practice, on the other hand, in terms of things to think about. So lots of open questions. And we'll come up with some examples of good open questions, and at the end, actually, what would be helpful is to sort of have your own cheat sheet of just, you don't need to have every question that you plan to ask in a meeting. Of course, you want it to be natural, you want there to be good dialogue, you want there to be good interaction, but having 2 or 3 killer questions is great. Listen, as we talked about, kind of listen to the answers, because that will tell you what the next question might be, and then you can say, tell me more, or could you share a bit more about that, whatever it might be. Are there things that have been said? So those buzzwords, I've sort of said hooks, but something that's really important to them that they'd really like to achieve. Look for those things that are very important to them, but also things that are, was they hot buttons or red flags? Not red flags for them in terms of your relationship with them, but sensitive topics. So some people, and it depends on personality types, which is a whole other presentation in of itself, but some people, it's really important to them that you go into lots of detail. Other people get really frustrated if you do. So just being able to kind of learn that stuff through questioning is really helpful. Controlling the discussion, so staying on track. Being able to take those notes, obviously record as well, so using that as best practice. Summarizing and confirming. So you've asked the question, you might want to go and confirm that back again. And obviously getting commitment, whatever the outcome is that you want or you'd hope to have from that meeting. So the next one I am also really guilty of. And in a way, it is similar to the multi-questioning as well. So this is quite a hard one for a lot of us to address. So it does take practice. I found this image on the right hand side, and the kind of filling the silence. And when sometimes people ask you, how are you doing? And fine. And then actually, if they take a second, you might, well, actually, I'm not that fine, or I've had a bit of a bad day. We all want to fill what feels like an awkward silence, and I say it feels like because actually it's probably not awkward for the other person. As I said before, sometimes you've planned that question, you ask every client that question, but that's the first time they've ever thought about it. They might need a bit of time to think about what they want to say and how they want to answer it. They might feel a bit intimidated they might have never engaged with somebody to take advice before, and they might want to not show up that they don't know something. So especially if it's big open questions about health, about family, life goals, just leave that silence and allow that. So don't be tempted to qualify, as I say, I ask because of this reason, or I assume it was this, or a couple of things. Just take 2 or 3 deep breaths if you need to, it will feel longer than it actually is. Clearly, if someone doesn't answer, then you need to fill it, but just allow a little bit more than feels comfortable. And I would sort of say practice sometimes with friends and family. You can tell them you're doing it or not, but next time you're speaking to somebody, and just say, how are you doing? And just leave it. That even felt uncomfortable for me just then without filling the silence. But it does take practice. So just stick it out. Don't don't beat yourself up about it, but be mindful of how silence can be really, really powerful, and show that you're really listening, and you can get a lot more from people if you give them space to speak. So often a tool, and I'm sure people have used and seen this before, is using what's called the question funnel in meetings, and really in lots of engagement, but in a meeting. So you start off with lots of wide open questions, and you can use the funnel multiple times in a meeting, but again, it just helps, and that actually might just be your meeting agenda, is very sort of broad open questions to begin with. You need to find out about this person that you're sat in front of. So broad open questions. So I've got some examples. Tell me about yourself, and explain to me, show me, describe to me, and you can ask more of that, but then you get down into a bit more detail, so that kind of specific probing stuff. Oh, tell me more. And actually sometimes really short questions are the most powerful ones. Things like tell me more. I'd encourage people to have the tell me about yourself, tell me more on a post-it note on your monitor when you're talking to people, or if it's on a Zoom, or obviously in person, write it down. But it just leaves so open for people to talk without having to answer very specific things. I generally found that to be quite powerful. Checking and clarifying, so facts and needs, so getting into a bit more detail, and then obviously in terms of confirming and closing, kind of confirming specifics. So if we did this, we could then move forward with that. If we did this, if we booked in a follow-up meeting, we could go into more detail. How does that sound to you? You can then start getting the commitment, for example, that you might want to get. It could be that there's an action for them. If we did this, I'll need you to provide this to me for the next meeting. How does that sound? So whatever it might be. But I would encourage you to almost think about a perfect meeting, and examples of, I'm just doing 2 or 3 examples of questions that you could use in each different one of those scenarios, because it would really help in terms of structuring a meeting. And actually this applies in a host of different scenarios. So as examples, I've touched on some of these already. So big, wide open questions. I love the kind of tell me's, explain to me, show me, describe to me. When I've done this training before, it's quite hard to do on a Zoom. I've when it's sort of been in person, when I've delivered some of this before, I've got a picture of like something really abstract, and I've asked people to sit back to back, and I've put, and this is a kind of good way to practice with I don't know, if a colleague or something, if you want to do this, but and you have one person staring at the picture, the other person can't see the picture, and they've got to ask, and they've got a blank sheet of paper, and they've got to ask that person what they're looking at, so that they can describe it and or draw what they think that person is looking at. So some people get it straight away, and there's no trick question, because they can just sort of say, tell me what you can see, describe to me the image in front of you, like really nice big open questions. Other people like, is it blue? No. Is it purple? Yes. Is it this? Is there an animal? Is there a mineral? Is there, and the point being, depends when in the training, hopefully not the end, but the beginning of the training. Some people are like, how have they got it straight away? You're cheating. It's like, no. Just those big open questions are so powerful. So I definitely encourage you, if nothing else, to take those away. The open, who, what, why, where, when, how. Sometimes why. So I'll talk about it, but sometimes you've got to be wary of the why, and I'll come up with some examples. What's most important to you. So when you want to get a bit more specific, if someone comes to you with a bunch of different goals and objectives, and you're thinking, crikey, there's a lot to address here. Where do we start? In terms of prioritizing, what's your decision-making process regarding this? What's most important to you? Which is more relevant? What's more important to you, X or Y? And then, the kind of closed questions are really good at the end. So as I say, too early on, they don't work, but towards the end, if this is sort of, if you're a planner, you might say, if I can get the document to the meeting, would you recommend that we meet next week? Or if I got it by tomorrow, when would work next? Or can I suggest a meeting next Monday or Tuesday? I don't know if you're this is more of somebody who was sort of sat on the provider side, I don't know, or in talking to the accountant or the solicitor about it. If they agreed with this, would you refer them to me? Whatever the scenario, you can think about different types of closed questions that you might apply. So I thought, obviously, we're not in a room together, but if you were to think about, how you could maybe improve some of these questions, I'll have to pick on you, Gretchen, for this, but I have got the answers as well. But some of them aren't too bad, but if you were to sort of critique some of these questions, it's quite useful to put it into practice. So, so could you tell me a bit more about yourself, your family situation, what you're looking to achieve from this meeting today? I think we've already kind of covered that a little bit.
Yeah, quite a few questions in there, isn't there? And
exactly,
doubling up, and it's pretty big. Like, I don't know. I think if you were a client, you're probably going to go and just remember you asked the first bit. Tell me about a bit about yourself. Yeah. And so you're probably not going to get everything you want from that one question.
Exactly. So yeah, and if you find yourself doing it, because often you'll be aware of it as these words coming out your mouth, you almost can't stop. Should say, so should we start with X? And you can kind of correct yourself. The second one, what haven't I asked you, or what haven't we discussed? That can seem a bit full on, and it puts too much onus on the other person, but equally there might be some, like, is there anything we've covered today you wanted to cover in more detail, or is there anything you were hoping we got out, spoke about in today's meeting we've not yet covered? Just something a bit softer, that's that might be a bit more amenable. I bet you might have seen this one or a similar, Gretchen. Do you know much about pensions? Or do you know much about whatever it might be, inheritance tax? Do you know much about X or Y? If I'm asked that question, I feel like I need to sound like I've got a better answer than I don't want to be too honest, because it's a bit too sort of binary, like, oh yes, I know loads, or oh, a little bit, and you haven't really found anything more else about well, what's a little bit?
It's quite judgy, isn't it, almost?
It is. Yeah, what's your knowledge of investments? Because I know, obviously we want to try and understand what's the client's experience, but so yeah, something more like, what's your experience of, what's your understanding of pensions, or what's your understanding, have you, of receiving financial advice? Have you experienced that before? Something like that's a bit more open. Someone said, well, my understanding's not great actually, or could you just assume I know nothing? Or it's great, I used to work in X or Y, whatever it might be. But do you know much? Assumes that you should know lots. It can just be a bit too abrasive, in my opinion. And this is the last one, that kind of be wary of the why. So I used to, I think, it can sound a bit aggressive if obviously you wouldn't just say why. But if you sort of said, I don't know, I came to you and I said, oh, my pensions are currently with Royal London and I don't know, Aviva, and you'd say, and why is that? I would, which is a valid question to ask, I would think I had to explain, I'd almost have to defend that. And so sometimes why can put people on the back foot, and it can make them feel like they need to defend what they've done. So why haven't you taken advice before? Why is all your money invested in this fund on Hargreaves Lansdown, and actually you've never taken advice before despite X, Y, and Z? Whatever it might be, why can be quite, it can elicit defensiveness. So again, what's your experience, or have you experienced that before? What's your experience of financial advice been? Has it something that you've engaged with? Whatever it might be, better than a why. So say, like, softly, you might go, and why is that? If you want to really probe and clarify in a sort of one of those question funnel pieces that you're doing, but otherwise why can be quite full on, in my opinion. Okay. So I mentioned earlier on, we've all been in meetings where they've run over, they've lost control. You're not really sure. You're like, that was great, met a new friend, had a lovely cup of tea, and we've agreed to meet again. But I don't really know if there's actually an opportunity there. I don't know if they liked me. I just don't really know. Or you find that, and obviously you can't always control this, clearly, and sometimes you go in with a plan, and then because of circumstances, or because the client really wants to talk about something, then of course it's going to go off piste, and you can't always, so you shouldn't kick yourself, because sometimes actually you just need to listen, and they might not be in the right frame of mind to make the decision today. But I would just encourage you to think about, when you're going to a meeting, what is the objective of that meeting? What would be a really good outcome from that meeting? And then work backwards from there. So Then you can think about, well, if that's the case, what questions do I need to ask? But also, sometimes when you want to go into loads of detail and they talk to you, you want to ask lots and lots of questions. And it's that kind of parking space point going, gosh, actually, we need to find out more about that. Or they mention, I don't know, you meet with somebody and they've got a whole network of other people that they might want to introduce to you. And you think, great. And I can describe it as being a bit of a magpie. And it depends on the personality type. And some people love structure and order, and other people are all sort of all over the place like a pinball machine. But it can be, especially if you know that you're like that as well, and the client is like that. Someone's got to keep that meeting under control. Other people are quite factual. They want to go through structure. It depends on what it is. So, but just think about, even if it's like for 2 minutes before you walk in, what would be a good outcome from that meeting? Because then you can think about the right questions to apply. So I know I'm sort of probably telling a lot of people what they already know, but having that clear objective, thinking about rapport and what questions you can ask at the outset and throughout, to really build rapport and connection, especially if obviously someone new versus an existing relationship. You might want to follow on or pick up on pieces that you've already you picked up from last time. So it always feels so meaningful to me when someone says, oh, you mentioned you were moving house last time I met with you. How has that gone? Or you mentioned your husband was getting a new job, or whatever it might be. Something like that is a really strong way of reconnecting quite quickly with somebody. Having an agenda, and I'll talk about this in more detail, because the agenda that you might give to your client won't look the same as your agenda, which will be far more detailed. Killer questions. There might be, when I say objections, it could just be nervousness, it could be inertia, it could be hung up on detail, on cost, whatever it might be. There might be some objections to not moving forward. And then just closing. So whatever it is, clear next steps and action owners. Even if the outcome is no, the outcome is, that was great, it was lovely to meet you, I can't help you. And or I don't think that you're right for me, whatever it might be. Actually, getting a no is better than a I don't know sometimes. So I used to talk with colleagues about, it's a yes and a no are much better than a maybe. Or not now is fine as well, but just knowing where you stand, basically. So the parking space or the parking lot, depending on whether you're American or not. So I would just encourage, on your meeting agenda, you'll have lots of detail, you'll have your key objectives. Think about those questions. So maybe pick up some soft facts that you want to follow up on. Capture your client's words. So when you're asking those questions, write those buzzwords down. If there's terminology that they use that you could use back with them later on, to really show that you've listened and to really get that message across. People love it when if you use those terms back at them, that's really powerful. The parking space being the bottom right hand side of that piece of paper or electronic paper, whatever you use. They're going to mention things that will be really interesting, and or you might want to follow up on, but it might be too much for that meeting. And or it's going to send you off down a tangent and you're not even going to, achieve anything at all. So you might just signpost at the end and say, at the end, if you've got time, now you mentioned X and Y. If you mentioned your son and daughter are just buying a house, is there something I can do to help you? Do you want me to talk to them, or can I help them, refer them, whatever it might be? It could be whatever. Then just having that in the parking space. But if not, it's something to explore for next meeting. And actually, sometimes it'd be a good excuse to have another meeting if that's what you need. And obviously agreeing those next actions and time frame as well, and being really clear on who's going to do what. So I would just really encourage, I suppose in summary, it's kind of really encouraging you to think about one, what your bad habits are. So if you know that, if you can do nothing else, is think about 2 or 3 really, really killer open questions to start a meeting. Think about those silences, and think, practice them as well. It takes a lot of practice. And if you've got somebody that you work with who wants to do this as well, practice asking somebody a big open question and then keeping your mouth shut for at least a minute. Put a timer on. It's really hard when you're a talker. But get comfortable sort of sitting on your hands and just not interjecting and just allowing that space, because it's quite powerful when you can do it. As I say, if it's not multiple questions, if it's something else, just think about that. Think about that perfect meeting agenda and what questions you might ask when in the meeting. Take time for the next meetings, to get to put some of that into practice, and just take a second to reflect as well when you've done that. As I say, practice with a friend, colleague, partner, anybody on the bus. Ask a big open question and just see where it goes. Don't overthink it as well. So I think above all, it's really important just to be yourself. You are your greatest asset. Your personality is your greatest asset. So you've also got to lean into that. And some people, as I say, it doesn't mean it won't work. It's not a complete science here where if you ask that, you'll get that. But I think it's just having those things and putting it into practice can just make the difference between a good and a great meeting. It's not going to be terrible if it doesn't work, but it can be really powerful when it does. And just think about, one or two enhancements at a time. Don't try and do everything. But yeah, pick the thing that's probably your bad habit and work on that, and then go from there. And that's it really. So that was it in summary. I imagine different people might have different experiences, different scenarios, and I'm certainly happy if anyone wants to have a chat further, then connect with me if you want to talk anything through. And I'm sure Gretchen, I'm sure you'll say the same. Are there any questions that you have or that have come through?
No, so not really any questions. I mean, I think that it's really interesting hearing you. It's even good, to have a recap myself. I love it when I'm listening to these things and there are things come up. But I wrote a few things down. I think there was the parking space analogy thing is great, even if it's almost like in your mind you would give yourself permission to not have to deal with it straight away and go, do you know what, in the priority list here, actually, this isn't, priority, but if we can come back to it, we will come back to it. I think the danger point we have with all these skills that we learn, and you're looking at open questions and then trying to, as you go, work through that funnel to more clarifying questions, and then to your closing questions, as it is, as you say, quite easy to go off on a tangent and realize that you haven't actually been with this person for 45 minutes and you've not really moved past an opening conversation that then attracted you to something else that then you've asked another question. And I think part of the skills that we do have to learn about making ultimately efficient meetings as well as productive meetings, and ultimately trying to get clients on board, which is the sales point of these meetings.
Yeah.
And even if that's in a coaching scenario, or if you are applying more of that rather than immediately looking to make an investment or a pension, etc., I think it is important to also recognize that a client can only concentrate for so long as well. So if you had 5 hours where people could, your time wasn't pushed and someone could concentrate for that long, think of the meeting you could have, because you'd have all this time to make all these questions and really great open questions, and but I think the reality is that life, most of us in practice, is not like that. So we're still working towards trying to get a time frame, but we want to make that as efficient and productive as possible for the client and for us. And things like the parking space, I wrote down also about the funnel and buzzwords back. I find that I think it's quite interesting what you were saying about putting buzzwords into maybe some of the writing that you then do as well, when I'm pretty good at repeating back, so what I've heard you say to me is X, Y, and Z, and this is important, and all of those. But whether you also apply that in their words in the report or in the letter, and that was a really good idea as well.
Yeah, I think to your point about timing, sometimes with meetings, if especially because there's certain clients you meet who always go off piece, and it's sort of, if you know that you've only got an hour and you've got to agree, you've got to pin them down on some actions, like you need them to agree that they need to go and get this information or confirm X or Y to you, and you probably need 10 minutes for that at the end. It's almost writing down the time on your agenda. So if the meeting starts at 4, write 4:45 down, like that's where you need to be by 4:45. And if you look at your clock and it's 4:30 and you're like on point one, how are you doing? Then you're going to be right. Do we need to push this forward, or do we need to actually book in another meeting? But you're right. It's hard, and sometimes, as you say, agendas can go out the window, and that's also okay. But it is, it can be a little bit of a challenge at times.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Anna. I really enjoyed it. I know everyone watching it will have as well. And as Anna said, if there's any questions that come out of anything that she's spoken about today, then, you know, let Anna know, reach out via LinkedIn. Also, you can message me, and, you know, we can always have a conversation around it. So thank you so much, Anna. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.